back to another episode of Backbench Drivers. I'm once again joined by our good friend Ilija Dokmanovic. How are you?
I'm doing well, mate. I'm doing well. Definitely still rubbing the crust from my eyes at this hour of the morning, but glad to be on.
Thanks for that. We do appreciate it down here, getting the insider scoop from someone in the Empire's capital. So we've invited you on because John and I we've been talking a lot recently around domestic issues and around Australia, but a big thing happened at the end of last year, and that was the victory of Donald Trump in the US election, which has over the last 2 months particularly had a huge influence on not only the news but also public policy and international relations. So that's why we've had Ilya on. So firstly, in the lead up to the election, what was the kind of mood in America that you were experiencing?
Okay, well, I mean, it's certainly very interesting. As I'm sure you know, I'm based in the East Coast. I'm in Connecticut, so this is very blue Democrat territory. And I mean, it did vote Democrat in the election, but it wasn't, there wasn't this enthusiastic sentiment of, oh, Kamala, it's her turn. This sort of, everyone getting out and really backing her. Most people, I think, were sick of the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, it did nothing for them. It just made them all poor. I mean, there's been a noticeable decline in quality of life and just sort of everyone's overall, I guess, happiness. Definitely a vibe shift in that regard with Trump's victory. But yeah, like just it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. The Harris campaign, it didn't have this sense of unity, which the Democrats love to harp on about. They love to talk. What was one of the taglines of like joy and unity, and all this bullshit, which are just essentially taglines for TikTok videos. And they were appealing to the completely wrong demographics. They were appealing to almost exclusively millennial white women and minorities. But most minorities did not, that I've interacted with, don't trust or don't like the Democrats. Sure, you have your vocal minorities, your drum beating, BLM, out in the streets, but that's such a small fraction. Most really couldn't give a shit. And in terms of like white men and millennial and Gen Z, this sort of new echelon of voters which have entered the scene in the past 4 to 8 years, completely shutting them out of the conversation, and having no sort of appeal to them, which I really think shot them in the foot. And you could see that with stuff like the Rogan podcast controversy, which we're learning more and more about as days go by. But yeah,
you look at
go on.
the Rogan thing, right? The complete difference between the Trump campaign getting a free, like obviously, Trump had to pay for his flight there, and there'd be a loss in campaigning elsewhere. But for all intents and purposes, a free visit to Joe Rogan gets 50 million views, highly influential, versus the Harris campaign spending millions of dollars to get, Eminem and Beyonce up there to say, hey, this person's a good, vote for him. It's a completely different way of campaigning. And that's what
Exactly.
both Trump in 2016 and 24 has done. He's revolutionized, I should say, how politicians campaign in the US. And
Absolutely,
it's done,
absolutely.
and despite Trump, raising hundreds of millions of dollars this time, he really didn't need that to win, because his most impactful things were going on live streams, going on podcasts, viral moments. He didn't need the war chest that he had, and some
No.
would say that's actually a detriment to him now. Well, the two important things I think you raised before was the Democrats targeting millennials, thinking double down on that demographic to get success like what happened under the Obama years. But what they failed to understand was that in appealing so heavily to millennials, they kind of turned off Gen Z, generation below them, and they didn't seem to have a strategy targeted towards Gen Z, who make up most of the 20-year-olds in America now. You'd say people 20 to 27, 18 to 27. So that's hundreds of thousands of voters across the country. And the Trump campaign had a strategy, through social media edits, and you had young people staffing that of the generation, compared to the Harris campaign, which just trotted out the same old machine from the Democratic Party. And then the second point you talked about was minorities not going so heavily towards the Democrat Party. And do you think that has any influence with these people like Candace Owens online, these vocal minorities on the other direction, giving that counterpoint to these minorities you're talking about, the loud ones, the loud BLM ones, who would previously, browbeaten people into voting their way, but now you have this discourse among blacks, Latinos, Asians. Do you think that's played a part, or what's caused those two phenomena?
Well, it's hard to sort of peg it definitively, but I definitely think that it's gonna sound weird to say, but ever since things like Kanye's controversy
Mm.
on that we all remember so fondly,
Yeah.
things like that, is showing that these sort of uncomfortable conversations sort of being had in these communities. Candace Owens, like you said, is another great example. And I also think the main thing is, these groups like African Americans, like Latinos that have been here for generations, not the new arrivals. These are
Yeah.
people that are also seeing their own opportunities and their own quality of life decline and diminish because of things like not securing the border, because of aid and these programs like money not going into their communities and not being invested. Now, I'm not saying that if the government handed out millions of dollars into urban schoolings, it would make much of a difference. I think that's a whole other conversation altogether.
Yeah.
But the fact that the government was more intent on sending billions and billions and billions of dollars to places like Ukraine and to Israel, and as we're learning with the USAID receipts being released pretty much everywhere else for the most asinine programs whatsoever. I think that there was a general sentiment of the Democratic Party is saying that they care about minorities, but they don't care at all. They care about lining their own pockets. They care about sexual deviance, which is not popular amongst I would say like these minority groups tend to be
Yeah.
more conservative socially, so they don't understand why the Democrats are pandering to
Yeah.
transgender lobbies and all this stuff. So they're just like feeling out of touch, feeling like they're not the main priority anymore. So that has a multitude of effects, whether it's just general apathy of I'm not going to go out and vote because what have these guys done for me, or
Yeah.
actively going to someone like Trump who they can relate to more, someone who is not afraid to enter a KFC or a Chick-fil-A or McDonald's
Yeah.
and put on an apron and start scooping fries. Doesn't have this
I mean,
it's relatable.
yeah. Who would have thought the guy with, three baby mamas, convicted criminal, being declared bankrupt would appeal to black Americans? Who would have thought, hey?
Who would have thought? Well, I mean,
Who would
in this past year, I've worked with a bunch of African Americans, and all of them have African American men, I should say, and all of them have very positive feelings about Trump. You're like, yeah,
Yeah.
man, that's my homie Trump. He's a good guy. I like him. He's a gangster, and like you're just like sort of laughing to yourself. You're like, yeah, I can see the appeal.
Yeah. And now just flipping over to the Democrat side, I think in recent news it's been announced that Minnesota Democratic farmer Labor Party chairman Ken Martin has been elected to head the DNC. Now, I don't know too much about Democrat internal politics, but it's my understanding that the Minnesota branch of the Democrat Party is one of the most progressive in the whole country. So could this could his election as the new DNC chairman be signs that the Democrats are doubling down on their policies, that they weren't progressive enough in
Well,
2024?
I think so, because it's not just this guy. You have to look at the vice chair,
Yeah.
David Hogg. One of these kids that quote unquote survived the Parkland shooting.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I know the Minnesota Democrats definitely have a reputation of being pretty radical progressives. And I think this could go one of either way. Either they are doubling down and it's gonna just shoot them in the foot, but the other thing that they do have now is male leadership, which I think they've been
Yeah.
lacking for a while.
And just a general competency gap.
Exactly. I mean, it's still early days. I don't think like someone like David Hogg, who is just an opportunist, and is one of these sort of mid-wit theater kids, has it
He
cut
got a
out
free ride
to
to Harvard. Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. I don't think he necessarily has the brain capacity to run an entire political party or co-run an entire political party. So we'll see. It's still early days, and as we get closer to the midterm elections in 26, I think we'll see what the shape of the Democrat Party has. But I don't have. I'm not thinking it's going to go well.
Yeah. And so switching over to the GOP now, it's safe to say it's Trump's party now. You know, he's come back from being disendorsed by everyone, throwing dirt on him, being banned off Fox News. And he's come back, swept the primaries quite convincingly, won the general, got both by electoral college and pure voter share. How does Trump's victory reshape the GOP?
Well, I mean, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And
Yeah.
Trump came along in quite a storm of just real ballsy. Sorry, are you getting a feedback loop? I'm getting a bit of an echo on my end.
Well, I'm not getting anything.
Fascinating. This is just me. So yeah, he's entered it very bold. He won the primary before it had even started, and it was a sight to behold, because of course the media and the sort of old GOP said, "Oh, we're not gonna back him. He doesn't have a chance after January 6th. He doesn't have our support." And he did what he does best, which is defy everyone's expectations and everyone's predictions and win. So, I definitely think there is a level of the GOP. The GOP is now being shaped into a Trump party. It's no longer the GOP of the Reagan era or the Bush era. He's made it his own beast. And I think with people like J.D. Vance as well, these Peter Thiel-backed sort of millennial Gen X, like definitely on the younger side of politics, sort of these political mavericks of the GOP, they're definitely reshaping it. What are they reshaping it into? I still think they're finding their feet in the new Trump era, but they're definitely getting rid of a lot of the old sort of Bush era neocon policies of endless wars and profits. All we care about is the stock market at the end of the day, and they're realizing that America's strength comes from America's ability to project power onto the world, and America's own domestic machine, which has been severely underutilized for the past 30 to 40 years.
Yeah, and we've seen these growing pains play out on Twitter and social media, especially with the H-1B visa scandal around Christmas time.
Yeah, well, that didn't last very long for Vivek, did it? He went from a very, nice, cushy role with Doge, where he would have had a lot of impact, and was essentially just ushered away into the Ohio electorate, which definitely isn't going to be as prestigious, and he's not going to be as effective. He'll be a great figurehead in the sort of Rust Belt RNC,
Yeah,
but he's not going to have any sort of substantial impact.
it
He's going to
definitely
have to do a
does.
lot of atonement before he gets to any serious role.
Definitely does have the hallmarks of a kind of a buyout. It's kind of you go there. You still get to be a governor, you still get some prestige, but you're nowhere near Washington because as much
Mhm.
as Ohio is a Republican state, it's not influential.
No, it's not. The only time it's influential is during federal election season, and as long as you have someone like JD Vance, who is an Ohio boy through and through, Ohio's definitely not going to come into question in terms of whether it's red or blue. It's firmly red.
Definitely. And there's also been under the surface some of these growing pains in terms of Trump's new administration coming in and butting heads. We've seen Matt Gaetz be selected as Attorney General, then drop out over some ethics investigation in the House. Then you see Republican senators come out and say they won't vote for Pete Hegseth, his defense sec pick. And there's just this animosity. Do you
Mm.
think there is still organized opposition to Trump within the Republican Party centered around Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska? Well,
Oh,
obviously there is,
absolutely.
but will that materialize into anything come the midterms or 2028, or will that just die out, peter out?
I think it's a case of these are the sort of last death throes of that sort of Bush era Reaganist conservatism, where it's about being the party of compromise and being the adults in the room, quote unquote. People like Mitch McConnell as well. These are names that they're in these positions because they've been there for a long time. And they do like regionally, I guess, have a sort of following, but they're also on the better side of like 70 and 80. They're falling apart at the seams, and just sort of the new guard is coming in and just uh, sort of leading them out of the room. When it comes to people like Matt Gaetz, I mean, I was disappointed that Matt Gaetz, you know, acted the way he did. When it came, like, I think he would have been a fantastic attorney general. He's a maverick. He is sort of. I read somewhere that when Trump was interviewing potential AG nominees, everyone was giving these spiels of I'm going to uphold the law of the United States, and I'm going to do my best. Then Matt Gaetz comes in and says, yeah, I'm going to cut some fucking heads. Which I think is exactly the attitude that we need in that position at this time. I
Yeah,
mean, we need someone
100%.
like Bobby Kennedy, um, senior, that is, who's no longer with us. But he was. I think he played his hand too quickly. And he sort of got scared far too quickly about the potential opposition he'd get from the Senate. And especially that older bunch of senators who vow that they would never vote for him. I think he genuinely should have stuck to his guns. And the other thing that he shouldn't have done is he shouldn't have put in his resignation for his House seat
Exactly.
so
It just makes him
quickly.
look guilty. It makes him look like he wanted a quick way out of not Parliament, Congress.
Well, it certainly has that effect, but I also think so. Like before, he pulled out of the attorney general selection process. He resigned from his seat in Congress. I think he originally, and that was like as soon as it was announced, he's like, "Yeah, I'm out of here. I'm going to be going to the federal government." So I think he acted far too quickly and far too brash, and you can't really double back on a resignation in politics, like especially of that scale. So now he's left to doing cameos, and he'll probably get a cushy network position with Fox. I think he may already have done. But
I think he's at some smaller one, like One American News or something like that.
oh wow, great! That'll really have a greater impact on things. But yeah, no, he really, I think he got a little bit too excited and a little bit too sure of himself, which is definitely a streak with people like Matt Gaetz. And he played his hand too quickly without seeing how the cards would fall. That I would say, like with the new federal picks, we have some great ones like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. I think fantastic for the roles that they're in. I think they're going to do a lot of positive impacts. But you also have to balance out those great picks with people like Rubio, um, and people like Hegseth. Now, don't get me wrong; I think Hegseth is a breath of fresh air. But both Rubio and Hegseth are these, very Israel Zionist aligned GOP guys, which
Yeah, because I think
again is a holdover from the previous generation. They have to do that because that's where their money comes from. So
yeah,
we'll see. We'll see. It's still early days.
I do think the trio of Hegseth, Rubio, and Mike Waltz, who's the national security advisor, is interesting. In the sense that they all have very similar foreign policy issues. They're all China hawks, they're all pro-Israel, and they're all kind of wish-washy on Ukraine. So it does show a very strong united front for Trump's foreign policy. And we've seen, especially with Marco Rubio, he's been quite influential in Latin America under Trump's first administration. So likely to see that continue in this administration, specifically around this issue of returning illegal immigrants and border security and combating the cartels in Mexico and Colombia and other states. I don't think Rubio is as bad as you do. I'm quite, in my opinion, he's quite a good compromise between the establishment and the Trump world. He kind of represents polished politician. And would I want him as president? No, but as Secretary of State, I don't think he's the worst pick. There could have been, 100 people easily picked that would have been worse than him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely, I do like to rail on Rubio just because I have have particular memories of the 2016 election when he was, or was it the Rubot, just repeating certain talking points. But I think if anything, if we have anything to judge off from the Secretary of State position, especially when it comes to Trump, is a lot of the Secretary of States come in and they sort of serve their purpose for what they are. I mean, Rex Tillerson was an oil mogul, and then you had Pompeo, who was an intelligence CIA guy. So I think Trump gets Secretary of State to represent the interests of sort of the various industries and sort of spheres of the American machine. And when they've served their purpose, or when he's figured out like their game, he sort of ushers them onto something else. So Rubio, when it comes to tackling Central and South America, I think is a very effective pick. I mean, this is someone who's bilingual. He knows the culture. He knows a lot of the pitfalls of Latin American politics. And if we've seen just from this week, he's making real headway when it comes to negotiating deals, especially with Bukele in El Salvador. I think he's doing a good job, and this sort of comes back to, I think, one of the points that we're going to touch on is this sort of global policy shift, in that I think America is going to be less focused on things that are going on in Europe and Asia, and are going to be more focused on the immediate consequences and the immediate effects of things going on in North America and Central America, and to an extent South America.
Yeah, we can talk about that now. I think I just want to nitpick slightly on the comment around less focused on Asia. Whilst I do agree in general in Asia, I do think there will be a heightened focus on China and what China's doing, specifically in the South China Sea and in the ocean, and particularly around US defense, because we've seen an expansion. I'm trying to remember the island chains. What do they call them? The first line. What do they call them?
Yeah, no, the
First island chains.
artificially,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and you've seen like an increase of US military activity across the first island chain, the second and the third island chain, and now that's purely just military funding, and we may see like more in more holistically, they are getting away from and leaving the WHO. Talks about leaving various UN organizations, and there's this return to kind of this American isolationism that we had before Wilson.
mm,
And you've seen, you know, two responses in Europe. You've had Olaf Scholz in Germany say, America will come back. This Trump moment will pass, and we'll have an America that will be interested and involved in European politics. And then you have on the flip side Emmanuel Macron in France, who's saying, this is what America's going to be more isolationist. We've got to look internally to Europe, and we've got to, pull the slack and he's kind of advocating for increased federalism in the European Union because of
mm.
the exiting of America. How do you think, firstly, that plays out? Which way will it be post-Trump? And secondly, how does that impact Australia going forward?
Well, I certainly think there's a converging of interests with Trump himself and just the overall arch of how the internal mechanisms of the federal government and the agencies have sort of trying to be positioning the United States. If we're looking at things like manufacturing, especially when it comes to manufacturing of microchips and these high capacity sort of processors, um, we've relied on places like Taiwan to manufacture them for us. And in the old sort of world order where the United States doesn't need to have manufacturing, we can outsource that over to Asia where it's cheaper to manufacture and then ship it over here. That works. And, everyone gets richer and everyone has, better profit margins. But when the security of that sort of chain of commerce comes under threat, and has come under threat with a stronger China, and Russia, which is no longer willing to really play ball with the West in terms of trade. I think the United States, both in the Biden era and in the Trump era, have naturally and correctly sort of started to move things back to the United States. During the Biden era, I know for a fact the state of New York has been looking at developing chip manufacturing in upstate New York.
Yeah,
Um,
because there was the CHIPS Act that passed Congress, and that was billions of incentives for developing uh, a chip and a superconductor manufacturing in the US.
exactly. So I think things like that, along with Trump putting pressure on Mexico, putting pressure on Canada, and putting pressure on Panama and Central America, saying like, we're essentially we're going to exercise more control and more of a presence, and you're going to have to deal with it because we've been essentially uplifting you financially for the better part of half a century, and we're coming to collect. I think it has this grander initiative of the United States wants to be able to be self-sufficient and not rely on the rest of the world to keep things afloat. And that's the thing. Ever since the end of World War II, the United States has guaranteed things like global trade, global security, and this sort of liberal capitalist political world order since Bretton Woods. But that was only ever going to last so long. So now the emphasis is on securing the situation domestically, securing the continent, because if the United States is able to, I don't think that they're going to go invading Canada with tanks and troops, but if they're able to bring them into the fold in some greater capacity as a vassal, secure the sort of Northwest Passage and then secure the Panama Canal as these important trade routes to be able to get things from east to west and still be connected with Europe and Asia on either side to keep whatever level of trade there is going. They'll more or less be able to be self-sufficient, and they want, if something goes wrong in Asia, if China invades Taiwan, it's not going to be a big fucking deal, because America will be able to just manufacture what they need to here on the continent. When it comes to places like Europe, I think it's sort of a similar situation where Trump has really seen, and Trump has always been a NATO skeptic. He's upheld NATO out of convenience, and just because that's what a lot of the party heads of the GOP and of the State Department have told him to do. But I think Macron has the right sentiment that the United States is not going to always be there. And if Europe isn't willing to essentially just roll over and be an extension of the United States, if they want to have any semblance of sovereignty, then they need to start looking inward and start having a sort of more powerful federal EU than it already is. And that's going to bring a whole other load of questions. I mean, the thing about Europe is beautiful continent. It's our homeland, after all. Great place, great culture. But in terms of natural raw resources to keep it going, it doesn't have it. It never has. That's why the imperialism of the 17 and 1800s occurred in the first place. So
Exactly.
I think we may have sort of imperialism 2.0 from Europe, focused on Africa. Not out of motivations of, well, based right-wing empire building, but more out of a case of necessity. I mean, France already has exercised that to a level of degree in West Africa with their former colonies. They still have a lot of control and a lot of support. I think that's just going to expand, especially if the United States and North America no longer becomes a firm security and trade partner.
And I think with France, that will obviously extend if they do have, not I want to say worsening, but weakened ties with America. I
Mm,
think an important thing to note there is their influence, particularly in the Sahel, has been challenged by Russia's mercenary group Wagner Group recently, and there's no signs of that slowing down. So it will be an extension of the Cold War between Europe and Russia will happen in Europe, and it might even happen as far east as around Djibouti and Somalia, and I'm forgetting the third country there,
uh,
Ethiopia. Yeah,
Ethiopia,
Ethiopia.
yeah.
Massive populations, abundant raw resources, and especially in Ethiopia with water, and that
Mm,
affects all the way up to Egypt. But I do see Macron's vision being carried out. But I think the challenging thing with Europe, not only in regards to resources, it's also population. Whereas in America, yeah, it's a very divided population, but they all speak English. They all have, largely a Protestant background or an Protestant
mm,
understanding of the world. Whereas in Europe, you've got Serbs and Spanish people, having to form a government together when the Spanish can't form a government or Greece can't even form a government. There's a lot of questions around Europe's future in terms of an actual logistical.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, it's going to be dominated by Germany and France. What happens if France
I
elects a right-wing government, Germany elects a left-wing government, and they
yeah.
control Europe? It's going to be big questions there. But I think you touched on it around America's Trump's his big three-ticket items. Foreign policy was Panama Canal, Greenland, and Canada. Then you touched about it about being for trade routes, which I think is important. But I think another two important things around particularly Greenland and Canada is missile defense systems
Hmm.
over the Arctic Circle from Russia, from Europe, because they already have Alaska. If they have Greenland out in the east and some missile defense site in North Canada, they kind of have a wide coverage for missile defense systems, and that goes into what Trump's been talking about, having Iron Dome in America. And the third point, I think, is the minerals that Greenland have, Canada have, but they don't have an economy that can access it. Denmark doesn't have any expertise in mining. Canada has very limited expertise in mining, yet they have all these rare earth minerals. They have, don't quote me on this, but they might have nickel and lithium and whatnot.
Yeah,
That's very
I mean,
important.
that's exactly right.
And so
There's
if Trump,
untapped potential there.
yeah, and so if Trump can go and say, Canada's going to be the 51st state, then 1 year later it comes out of it with, they've given America land to get a defense installation with missile defense and a Navy port and exclusive economic access to the mining industry in both countries. He's going to come away the winner. And that's where I think Australia comes into it. In the changing world order, we're not going to be welcomed into the axis between Russia, China, and Iran, and North Korea, and South Africa
No.
in that world order. So we're not going to be that useful to Europe, really. I mean, we could with materials, but it's the exact opposite side of the world, and they'll have enough troubles with themselves. So I do see Australia's future in doubling down in the American sphere of influence, and that can benefit us tremendously because we do have these rare earth minerals, and we do have uranium, we do have a nickel industry which has recently been tanked by China investing heavily into Indonesia. So we do have the expertise. We have per capita probably one of the best mining industries in the world. So we could see America investing a lot into our minerals, trying to de-invest away from riskier countries in Africa or Asia, as well as investing heavily into our military. We have these massive goals of expanding our navy in particular. You've got councils in Gladstone wanting a naval.
Oh, I think I've lost you there for a second, mate. Hold on. But going off of like what Australia's future is in this sort of new global sort of shift, I think right now when it comes to the United States, in terms of priorities, I don't think Australia and Australia's future is necessarily at the top of the pecking order. The United States and the UK and Australia, we all have security agreements and treaties that we've signed. We have the AUKUS agreement, which is in everyone's best interest to keep going, especially the United States, since they're footing the majority of the bill. I think it's tough. It's tough to really gauge because the Australian government, and for a large, and understandable like part of the Australian attitude, we have a natural sort of distrust towards the Seppos. We really do. But we're gonna need to get over that if we're going to be able to sort of benefit from how things are shifting. Otherwise, we're going to be far too reliant on Asian trade partners, which is not beneficial in the long term, especially demographically. We'd be much better off relying on the Americans and their economy and cooperating with them as a sort of global north and global south sort of dynamic. The other thing which I wouldn't necessarily count out. Now, obviously, the United Kingdom is also another vassal of the United States. Their special relationship is in name only. They're very subservient to what the United States wants and needs. But with Europe potentially going their own way, the United Kingdom might want to exercise a little bit of semi-soft, maybe semi-hard power in the Kanzuk. I don't think the idea of Kanzuk is necessarily dead, and I think the Canadians and the Australians would be more prone to agreeing to a Kanzuk sort of Commonwealth alliance and then cooperating heavily with the United States rather than the United States just taking it all for themselves. I think that'd be much more appealing, because that way the United States still gets what they really want, which is cooperation with Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom in terms of security and trade, but it satisfies the urge of the UK, Canada, and Australia to not be American. It's I think that one we're still gonna have to wait to see how it's really going to come into fruition. I don't think we're really gonna see what things look like until post-Trump. How the sort of cards are gonna fall on the table.
And now, talking about how America's policies shift and going forward, this brings us to the question of, does he have the right people in his admin to carry this out, and how does his admin the second time round shape up versus his first administration?
Well, I think we touched on it sort of briefly beforehand. I mean, it's definitely a new, younger administration. A lot of people that have started to distance themselves from the GOP of Bush and Reagan, and are sort of understanding that the 1990s post-Cold War system that America was benefiting from is no longer the reality, and that we need to sort of reprioritize what the United States needs, which is more than anything domestic security. That's why you have people like Tulsi in the as the director of national intelligence. That's why you have people like Homan as the border czar and Rubio as the secretary of state, because these are all people that understand that America's immediate security interests and security threats don't lie in Asia, and they don't lie in Russia and Europe. They lie at the border. They lie in Central and South America predominantly, which is why I think the designation of the cartels as terrorist organizations is very interesting, because it may mean a lot more action against them in trying to stabilize Central America and get rid of a lot of that criminal network that has essentially dictated policies and brought drugs and fentanyl and all these nasty things into the United States, which are security threats, and are threats to the sort of power that the United States can project onto its region and the rest of the world.
Yeah, because if I'm not wrong, the designation as terrorist organizations allows the CIA in particular a lot more imperative, let's say, to combat the influence of the cartels, not only coming into America, but also in the country of origin.
Exactly, because at this point now, like, while the Mexican government can say, the United States can't, act on Mexican soil, we can get the spooks of the CIA to do covert ops against the cartels, and Mexico won't have anything to say about it. Which is another reason why I think Trump has been putting so much pressure on Mexico in particular, is just tell them essentially, we're going to sort this out, and you're not going to have a say in it, because we can't rely on you to combat the cartels anymore. This is no longer negotiable. This is no longer a case of, we'll let the Mexican authorities and the federales deal with it. This is a case of, it's now encroached so much onto America's security and sovereignty that the United States has no other option but to take firm action, whether that's covert, whether that's overt, through the actual military. We'll see. Again, we're only 2 weeks in, but it's definitely got a long trek ahead of us.
Yeah, and it'll be the first time in a long time that the US Army or the Defense Force actually is used in a defensive manner for America, not some far-flung overseas war. And that links us nicely into one of the biggest items in the news this week, and it's Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Trump in Washington, and it was Trump's bizarre statements around America controlling the Gaza Strip, leveling it, and hinting at America committing ethnic genocide against Palestinians. Now, long-time listeners would be aware of kind of this influence that just even any observant person would be aware of the influence that Zionists have on Donald Trump and the Republican Party, especially in America. But even this is just outrageous. It's perplexing. I saw it and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a meme. Then you see him pulling the chair out, sitting Netanyahu down in his, butler's coat and whatnot. Can you give us any light or any inclination as where this has come from? Because this is a drastic escalation of rhetoric from Trump, who previously was saying he's going to solve it, both sides are going to be happy with the result. But I don't think the Palestinians are going to be happy with what Trump said recently.
Yeah, no, it was quite shocking to see, and I think everyone on the internet is claiming to be an expert about what's going on, or saying trust the plan, guys. Trump's actually pulling one over on Bibi, and this is all smoke and mirrors, the typical sort of stuff. At the end of the day, the only people who know what the motivations are for this move are going to be people like Trump and Bibi, and perhaps some people in the State Department. For me, just looking at it with as much of an objective analysis that I can, I think Trump saying we're going to go in, we're going to take over Gaza, I think is part of Trump's personality as the tough negotiator, where he's seeing the issues with the Palestinian and the Arab world not really wanting to come to the table, as well as the Israeli side, constantly overstepping their goodwill in carpet bombing civilians, and essentially saying to both of them, if neither of you are going to sort this out, then the United States is just going to go in and take it over. Because we can. Because we've funneled enough money into this conflict as it is through State Department foreign aids, through bills. Now the United States is coming to collect. I think that's part of Trump's motivator. I think, yeah, there probably is an aspect of, he's got a Jewish son-in-law. His top donors are all Jewish Zionists, and they're probably getting something out of this, whether that's development contracts or something, something along the lines of that. You have to remember that someone like Jared Kushner, his family in the property development industry. So for the United States to go into somewhere like the Gaza Strip, the Kushner family and the Adelson family would be making a mint off of real property development there. So he'd be satisfying his donors' goals in that situation. But the thing that I'm most that sort of just keeps going around my head is, if the United States was to establish a firm and almost permanent presence in the Gaza Strip, I don't think they'd ethnically cleanse it of Palestinians, because that's bad PR, and the United States doesn't like bad PR.
Definitely. But it's just the language in the statement, level it. That's the same kind of language. Is if you're going to infer you're going to ethnically cleanse a region, you'd say you'd level it.
Listen, I'd love a new American Milosevic as much as the next person, but I don't think that's necessarily Trump's goal. I think he's just he's not a very polished speaker. When he says level it, I think he's looking at it in terms as a property developer. He's seeing a bunch of rubble, bombed out buildings and saying level it. I don't think he necessarily means let's get rid of all the Gaza Palestinians. So going back to my point, having a United States military presence there stops the Israelis from moving in and taking it over outright and ethnically cleansing it themselves. If American troops are standing in between the way of Israel and Palestinian civilians, that's not going to be good for Israel, because then they lose their sort of stake in the Gaza Strip, which they want outright. They don't want some goy taking over the Gaza Strip. Are you kidding me?
But then
And
you could, if that is the solution, you could easily see false flag attacks against potential false flag attacks. I should preface, against American troops. Trying to goad America into attacking Palestine or Israel on the other's behalf.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, let's not uphold Israel as this not that you do, of this morally virtuous character. Terrorism is an action that they're definitely not beneath. They've done it before in the past, the King David Hotel bombing, etc., etc. They're willing to commit acts of terrorism to fulfill their greater policy goals. So we may just see that. But it's now then a question of, is the United States intelligence agencies and the State Department willing to just look the other way in this new world and just let Israelis attack American military servicemen outright with no consequences just to fulfill Israeli policy goals? Or have the priorities shifted, and have we started to see Israel as a not a regional ally, but a potentially hostile nation? And the other thing I want to say is, the goodwill that the United States has towards Israel is maybe going to last one more generation, if that. If you look at polling, if you look at the
Yeah.
data, um, Americans on both sides of the political spectrum have negative attitudes and opinions of Israel. So, this whole Zionist rhetoric is only going to last so long. That's part of the reason why Israel has pushed so far militarily to nullify Syria as a threat, to take out Gaza as a threat, to take out Hezbollah as a threat, is because they know that they can only really do this now. Because in
Yeah.
10, 15, 20 years, they're not going to have the backing of a global superpower to get all this done. So they're going to be on their own. So they have to do all this stuff. So and that's the thing, if the United States establishes a permanent presence where they're there for, 30, 40, 50 years in Gaza, building stuff, sort of acting as maybe like a DMZ sort of zone, or as Trump said, this global city in Gaza, which is slightly Babylonian in rhetoric, but we'll look beyond that for now. But if they're to establish this presence, and the American attitude towards Israel changes in the future, that means that Israel now has a global military superpower outpost at their doorstep, plus having Turkey to the north, which Turkey is expanding as a power in the region, with their proxies in Syria, and future probably proxy in Lebanon, sort of a neo-Ottoman empire, if you will. So Israel is going to be surrounded on all sides with the global superpower directly to their south, and then the Sunni Muslim world, which is now not wanting to normalize relations with them at all, despite what the United States has been trying to goad them into for the last 8 years. This action hurts Israel more in the long term than it does, show the United States as just a Zionist lapdog. This is hasty. It's a hasty decision if this was Israel's goal, and it's not going to bode well for them in the future, I don't think.
I think I would agree with you in large part that, the regional influences of both Turkey and Saudi Arabia are going to be probably the largest influences in America's decision making, because they don't want to piss off the Saudis or the Turks,
No.
especially with Turkish controlling the Strait I can't remember the strait, but out of the Black Sea, they
Bosphorus.
control access.
Yeah.
Bosphorus Strait, which is crucial with Russia now controlling Crimea, building naval bases in Georgia, and by and large controlling parts of Ukrainian coastline. So Turkey is an important ally against the growing threat of Russia and China in that region, as well as Saudi Arabia, particularly with their oil reserves. So it is a balancing act for America. Obviously, the vested interests in pursuing Israel's goals, but there's also the vested interests in protecting relationships with regional partners.
Exactly.
And it seems, particularly with Iran, this whole rhetoric, it's just been so empty for so long. The Trump saying, if I get assassinated, I've got plans to destroy Iran. When the Iranian president's coming out saying he wants to, I'm not sure if he said normalize, but improve relations with America. So you have, I do see a future where America's more neutral across the board in the Middle East, particularly with oil becoming less important, with the emergence of green technologies. It'll still play a role and there'll still be American interest in the region, but I do see the merits in your forecasts for the region.
Well, again, it's still early days, and there's still a long road to go down. But I think that Israel has overplayed their hand and their goodwill, and Israel was so focused on the threats from Iran and Syria, Shia, and relatively, or not in the case of Iran, but in the case of Syria, relatively secular, interventionist sort of Muslim powers. But the Sunni world is not that. The Sunni Muslim world is very much like, oh, we'll fund a terrorist network, and we don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And if Israel is to piss off the Saudis to the south of them, the Turks, the Jordanians, who have said if there's stuff in Palestine, well, the Jordanians apparently,
they're too much paid off by America. Same with Egyptians. I don't see Jordan ever, actually, they might, talk a tough game against Israel, but I don't see them ever going against Israel because it will damage their relationship with America.
Well, they may not go directly against Israel, but they're definitely not going to directly support them either. So, this Israel is not in a great geopolitical position. They're right on the Mediterranean. They don't have great access to fresh water. Their main source of water is from desalination plants. If you were to take out, 3 or 4 desalination plants in Israel, the population suffers greatly.
An Australian government, we are not advocating for that.
No, we're not.
We're not advocating for that. We're just saying if it were to happen.
If it were to happen, it would be a good no.
No, don't say that. You got free speech in America. Remember that.
That's true. It never happened, but if it did, it would be a good thing. But yeah, no.
From a military point of view, it would be good. It'd be a good military victory.
It's a great military
horrible. Humanitarian horrible. Got to preface
Exactly.
No.
Just purely objective in terms of military wargaming. Israel is and has never been in a great position, and if they don't have support from the United States, they crumble very quickly.
It's realistically, you think back on their choices. I'm not too well read on what the distrust between Syria and Israel would have been, but in general, Baathism could have been supportive of Israel. A very secular kind of Arab nationalist ideology could have been Israeli allies.
Yeah, it could have been, but the Israelis. I think it comes. Yeah, they wanted the Golan Heights, and I think it also comes down to the strained relations of the Arab world since the 6-Day War, and just the Baathist powers' natural hostility towards Israel as an entity. But now Baathism is dead and gone. Rest in peace.
It's a great shame, in all fairness.
I miss Assad Syria so much. The aesthetics and the songs were fantastic. But this new Syria is going to be interesting. Is it going to be a vassal of Turkey, or is it going to be a different state altogether? Is it going to end up like Libya? You know, that's a whole other can of worms that I'm sure we can get into in a different episode.
We'd love to have you back on that, but I think that wraps up our episode nicely. Thank you, Ilija, for coming on. Plug
Thank you very
yourself
much,
there.
Maddie.
Yeah, that's the first time I heard Maddie on the podcast.
It's good
Don't
old.
get any ideas, John. John, you're not getting any ideas. Yeah, plug yourself, Ilija.
Yeah, so on X, formerly Twitter, I'm at Punished Gumtree. You can find my written work on the Mallard UK. I don't really have much else going for me ever since I went back to grad school right now, but we'll probably have some things cooking up in the future. So stay tuned.
All right, we'll put everything down in the description so you can click on it, follow him. Brilliant, smart guy. For us, go nationalobserver.co, follow us on Twitter, follow John, us on Telegram, and all your podcasting apps, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, spread the word, tell your mum, tell your nan. And thanks. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.